be more excited about what this legislation means for the future of our state, because we know that one of the most important things, and frankly one of the biggest responsibilities that we have as a government, is to provide and help every child in our state have access to a quality education. And we took major steps during this legislative session to make that possible, to actually help students and put them on a pathway to prosperity, to empower our parents, and frankly, to reward our hardworking teachers in a way that they deserve. For far too long, we have kicked the can down the road when it comes to education. We've tinkered with the system, and we have allowed our students in our state not to get all of the things that they deserve. We've allowed our teachers to not have the right incentives and the right level of pay that frankly I think that they deserve. And because of the work of the members in this room and the members across our state, we're actually able to deliver for parents, for students, and for teachers. And it's something I'm incredibly proud of, because we know that this isn't something that is just going to impact our state over the next couple of weeks or months, but this is something that will have a generational impact for the better. Something that will help, again, put all of our students on a pathway to prosperity, which I think at the end of the day, we may disagree sometimes on how we get there, but I don't think there's anybody who doesn't want to see our students reach the highest levels and have every opportunity available to them. Frankly, I was tired of watching Arkansas rank at the bottom in all of the places that I know we're capable of being at the top. We went from being one of the very lowest, 48th in the country in teacher pay, to top 5 overnight, making us competitive with every other state in the country. We went from putting students in boxes and not giving them the opportunity, and parents the opportunity, to make better decisions about how their child can best be educated and where they can best learn and thrive. And now parents have a lot more opportunity. And our students are going to see a level of success that they haven't been able to because of this legislation. And Secretary Oliva and I have had the chance to travel around the state over the last couple of months and answer questions. Is this a perfect piece of legislation? Absolutely not. But we know it is one that is absolutely imperative to see our state change the trajectory that we're on and start moving up to the top of the ladder where we know that we belong. We want to make sure that we're working with our stakeholders across the state on the implementation side. It's going to be the key to success. And we're working very hard to meet with parents, teachers, school board members, superintendents, so that we can answer questions directly, clear up any misconceptions there are about the legislation, and make sure that the implementation is done to the very best of our ability so that students actually get to see the benefits of what this is going to do. We can't tell you how much we appreciate your willingness to spend time with us here this evening. I know there are a lot of places that you could be, especially in the summer and in the evening, and the fact that you chose to be here is something that we certainly appreciate and look forward to a very good back and forth discussion this evening. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Secretary Oliva, and then we'll take some questions.
Thank you, Governor, and thank you for your leadership and your bold vision for how we're going to transform teaching and learning here in the state of Arkansas. And thank you to the legislature. I see some superintendents over here, and for everybody for coming out tonight and being part of the conversation. I hope that's what we get from today, is that it's a conversation. I'm relatively new to the state. I've been part of the state here for almost 6 months now, getting ready to celebrate my 6-month anniversary. But we've definitely hit the ground running. And one of the things that I really like about the LEARNS bill and the approach is that we know we needed to do something bold. We know we needed to do something different. And as someone that's traveled the state, I've seen a lot of really talented folks. I've almost done 10,000 miles. I think when I get back to Little Rock today, I'll have driven 10,000 miles in the state, visiting every single region, all of the educational cooperatives, meeting with district leaders, talking to teachers. We got a lot of good people working on a lot of amazing things. But if the system's not aligned and it's a little bit fragmented, then we're not setting people up for success. So that's what this bill is really accomplishing. It's a comprehensive approach that recognizes that a one-size-fits-all approach to education doesn't work for every student and family. It realigns everything, and I like to say from cradle to career. It looks at everything from how are we going to support high-quality early learning environment and make sure that every family that wants to participate in high-quality early learning environments have an opportunity to do so. How do we look at K-12, make sure that our students are reading at or above grade level, really investing in that early learning space, because we know we want to see more students come to school ready to learn by kindergarten, and then look at where we are with third graders reading at or above grade level. I know we can do better. We have the talent here. We're adding additional reading and literacy coaches. We're making sure that students have high quality access to 90-minute reading blocks and getting the intervention that they need, access to grade level instruction every single day. We're going to be able to have a statewide monitoring of student performance so that it's not fragmented where everybody's working on something different. And then we know through K-12, people need options. And the reality is not every student is on a highway to university, but the post-secondary attainment comes in different packages, and we need to have exit ramps and on-ramps. And one of the things that we're starting to work on that I think is exciting is looking at a career high school diploma where students can get credit for what they've earned and be ready to work or transfer those credentials to post-secondary opportunities. So this is it's engaging work. It's a lot of work. As we have made a commitment once the bill was passed, is to go out to communities, talk about what we're seeing, get input so that we can make things better and be transparent through the process, because we heard a little bit about the rules making process going through the next phase. We've established a portal. We put out a call statewide for anybody in the state that wanted to help be on a work group to be a part of that process. We had over 1,300 people apply. So those work groups are established, and we're going to be starting to draft recommendations that we're going to post publicly, and we want to get it right, because we can have the best legislation, but if we can't implement it with fidelity, then we're just going to kind of keep seeing the same results that we're going to get. So this is really a commitment to the state. It's a commitment to the people in our communities that if we're all working on the right things the right way, we're going to see dramatic improvements. So I'm excited to answer in some questions tonight and have a healthy dialogue.
Great. With that, we will open it up. I know that there were a couple people who submitted questions ahead of time online. We'll start with one or two of those and then open it up to the room.
Question from Jackie Martin. Jackie Martin, coming.
Thank you. Thank you for being here tonight, Governor, and I really appreciate you taking the time to come speak to the people to explain the LEARNS Act. I know there's a lot of confusion around it. My main concern is, will this help our children achieve at higher levels than currently what we find in our schools, and how does that translate to increased scores in the ACT test?
Well, I think first the simple answer is yes, absolutely, because we haven't seen an investment like this in our state's education system in decades. This is one of the largest investments, not just in all education, but specifically in public education, which is where the majority of our students are educated. We are doing a much better job of helping keep some of our best and brightest teachers in the classroom so that those individuals and those students are getting access to the best that there is. By rewarding our teachers with higher pay, there's a greater incentive for them to be in the classroom, and not just higher pay, but other incentives that are opened up, whether it is being paid for their tuition if they go into the teaching profession. That's one of the things that's part of this legislation, as well as some incentive-based programs that will help a lot of teachers, whether they go into high impact areas or some of the harder to get demographics, teaching in those classrooms. We're going to help see some of those students have some of the best teachers that we have in the state. One of the other things is a huge focus on literacy. It's one of the things that we know makes such a massive determination in a student's success. And we're investing in a way that we haven't in decades in our literacy, both through creating greater access to pre-K programs. Sorry, I'm finding a little bit of a cold here. Pre-K programs, as well as 120 reading coaches across the state that will help catch up our students. Those are fully funded and paid for by the state, that will go into districts and classrooms that need it the most and help our students that are at greatest need. Right now in the state of Arkansas, only about 35% of our third graders are reading at or above a third grade reading level. And we know that that is simply unacceptable. Thankfully, in this area, we have some of the highest performing districts in the state. Unfortunately, though, even those districts we still don't have where a majority of our third graders are hitting that most basic and critical benchmark. There's not a single county in the state of Arkansas where a majority of third graders are reading at or above a third grade reading level. And to me, that's unacceptable. And so helping address that, early intervention, greater access, and immersion services like tutoring, like our reading coaches, we know is going to have a great impact, not just in the immediate, but in the long-term success of those students. And so those are a couple of the things that I think are absolutely critical in this legislation. Not to mention the fact it opens up more opportunities. If a student is not getting what they need at a certain school, it opens up opportunities for their parents to make a decision that there's a better place potentially for them to be educated, and they have that option, as well as the career readiness programs, dual track diplomas. As Secretary Oliva stated, not every student in the state needs to be on a pathway to a four-year university. And so by giving students another opportunity, another pathway through the LEARNS Act, we're helping students go directly into the workforce when they may not need to go to a four-year university. They may need a trade or a vocational program or getting certification while they're already a student in high school. Those are a lot of things that are in this legislation that we know that are going to help give a greater foundation and change students' lives for the better. Sorry, that was a long answer, but there's a lot in there that we could unpack. But the short answer is absolutely. I know and have total confidence that we're going to see student success go up.
And if I was to add to that, Governor Sanders did a really good job explaining that, but one of the things that she touched on is the research is really clear. The greatest indicator in student performance, you talk about student performance going up, the greatest indicator of what's going to increase student performance is the teacher standing in front of that room each and every single day. The second greatest indicator is the principal leading that school. So part of what this initiative does is invest in teachers, because we want to recognize, retain, and recruit the best educators we can to get in front of our students, and support principals with the tools and resources they need so they can lead the school. But I go back to those key metrics that the third grade students reading at or above grade level in kindergarten readiness. One of the things that Governor Sanders tasked our agency when she first went into office through an executive order was to kind of get a snapshot on the state of early learning in the state of Arkansas, and look at where are areas that have high quality child care programs and high quality voluntary pre-kindergarten programs, and find out where they are. Well, there's a reality that there's some deserts and islands that exist in the state. So as we start building out this map, we need to work with communities and say, there's families that want to participate in programs, but there isn't access to programs. So can we partner with community centers, faith-based organizations, civic organizations, school districts, co-ops, to make sure that every family has access? We talk about fragmented, uncoordinated systems. Right now, there's about 5 or 6 early learning programs in the state of Arkansas, but depending on who funds that program, depends on which agency and which division oversees that program. And every one of those programs has a different database, a different definition of what high quality learning looks like, and a different definition of what kindergarten readiness is. The LEARNS bill is pulling all of that under the Department of Education so that we can fund students and not systems, and make sure that we're setting up programs around what students need. So building that foundation in kindergarten readiness is step number one. Investing in that early learning space, supporting professional development around the science of reading, making sure that students have an explicit approach to phonics, phonemic awareness, building out fluency, vocabulary, all of that leads to comprehension, giving high quality standards and materials to do that. But we also are going through a procurement. We have the ability now to procure, it'll take about a year to get there, a unified coordinated progress monitoring system so that parents, students, and teachers can see how students are performing. Right now, everybody does something different. We're gonna have these systems set up statewide, because I believe we can get 90 to 100% of third graders at or above grade level. And when we do that, a lot of the other challenges we face on setting students up for success throughout their high school career, they tend to just go away, because if you have a good, strong foundation in literacy, you're excited about learning because you can participate. And when students are excited about what they're learning and see relevancy, they go up beyond the learning day to stay active. So there's a lot of pieces here that's really about aligning a system. So I'm confident when we get all of this in place, we're going to see immediate results.
I think we have maybe one additional question. It's a bit
Our
ahead
next
of time.
question is from Susan Brewster.
It's right here.
But I was wondering about how all the learning and that and the literacy and stuff like that will affect private schools and homeschool parents who like to be involved in public school, maybe a sports thing or whatever have you, but still the education part is very important. And as a teacher myself, I have a private school or whatever have you, but I really care about even the public school kids and that and what we can do to maybe help both of them working together to help the parents with their children. Because a lot of the children that I work with is like tutoring and things like that, the parents are frustrated because they feel like their child, maybe their child is defeated or they're I don't know, all the different things that go on in a public setting sometimes. And I was just wondering, implementing what you have set up with the Learns things and that, how will that affect the private schools or the homeschool families that others might be involved in?
Make sure I follow your question correctly. I mean, I think the ultimate goal is that we see whether a student is in a homeschool, a private school, a public school, a charter school, that they're successful and that we're giving them the tools that they need to be successful. And so, making the opportunity available. I have 3 kids. I'm a mom of an 11, a 9, and an 8-year-old. And so I know that each one of my 3 kids needs different things. And so a one-size-fits-all approach is simply not going to work. We've seen that it doesn't work. So providing opportunity, making sure that each student, each family, each parent has the ability to determine the best pathway forward for them is one of the objectives that I think we're certainly going to accomplish through the Learns legislation. One of the things that I think is important to note is that if a individual or a family decides to participate in the educational freedom accounts and go to a private school or homeschool, there are a couple big kind of misconceptions that exist out there. Number one is the private school has to opt in and make a decision to participate, and if they do, there will be a state standardized test that they have to be willing to administer that is accepted by the Department of Education and Secretary Oliva. And I think that there's a big idea that there will be no assessment, no accountability, and that's simply not the case. And when it comes to homeschool families, that's another thing. A family would have to opt in to participate in the program. And it's not like the state is going to send a blank check and say, spend it how you want. It will be used specifically through third-party system of things that are very specific to a child's education, like purchase of textbooks and curriculum. Somebody can't go out and buy an Xbox and say, I'm using this for my kid's education. And so there will be very strict pieces of accountability that will apply to a private school or a homeschool family that decides to opt in and participate in the program that would add that accountability measure that I think is absolutely critical to the success of the program.
If I was to add to that too, I think it's important for everybody to remember the Learns initiative is really about building up the public school system. There is value in building up the neighborhood public schools. That's where most families grow up. That's where their parents went to school, their parents' parents went to school. Kids play together, they're on T-ball together, they want to go to school together and learn together. But we also know that we need to empower parents because maybe that school is not able to meet their child's need. So how do you have high quality choice programs? We don't want to just establish choice programs to have choice programs. We want to invest in our public schools, but we also want to provide opportunities for parents if they do need to seek another option, know that that option is of value and of quality. So some of that nuances of how do you define that, that's where we're going through the rules making process. In fact, we have a work group that's helping navigate a lot of those same questions. They've already met a few times. We've established a portal at our agency. So if you kind of just go on our main website page, you can see a Learns portal, and we're updating all of that information so that if you're wondering how the progress is coming, a lot of that's going to be handled there, and we'll get this across the finish line pretty soon.
Great. I think now we can open it up. If anybody has a question, just raise your hand and they'll bring a mic around. We'll try to get to as many as we can. Yes, ma'am.
Yeah, I'm an occupational therapist and been doing it for 40 years in the school systems. And over the years, I've seen as recesses become less frequent and as equipment that allows bodies to move disappears, that learning has decreased. As an occupational therapist, I'm aware that our brains exist in a body and they get fed through our movement and through. Is any part of that being taken into account? Because sometimes just giving them a little extra 15-minute break where they do certain things can actually increase their readiness to learn.
Again, I hate to harp on being a mom of the certain age kids I have, but my 8-year-old, if I ask him to sit down for 8 hours, it's never going to happen. He's not going to hear anything after about the first 15 minutes, if I'm lucky. 15 minutes may be even an exaggeration. So certainly the ability to move, but I think that's what we have to give teachers, the flexibility to make those decisions. And I'll let Secretary Oliva go into more detail, but that's why having good teachers in the classroom is so important, because they can read the room. They can tell when their kids are at their limit, and they know that they need to get them up and move them around and let them get some of that energy out. And so giving and allowing teachers that flexibility to make those decisions about their classroom, I think, is incredibly important. And I'll let Secretary Oliva jump in on that as well.
Did you say 30 years or 40 years?
42.
So thank you. 42 years. Thank you for doing that, and especially in a specialized field like occupational therapy, because school districts are lucky to even tap into a resource, have an expert like you that knows this realm of work.
If I may make one more comment, most schools have occupational therapists right in their schools now, and they can use them for ideas, just really quick, very quick things when they know that, but not all teachers know those things.
Right, and so I don't think this particularly is addressed in Learns, but as we're implementing best practices to improve teaching and learning, I think you're spot on, and you have to. Yeah, you have to. And the reality is teaching and learning is very complicated, and creating those experiences are different and nuanced for every single child. But especially with the evolution of MRIs, we've learned a lot about how the brain works, and everything you're saying about that kinesthetic learning, there's a place for that in every classroom, and you hear it from a mom's perspective, an educator's perspective, and that's why we have to invest in those teachers to give them the strategies and toolkit, like to build out their robust toolkit so that they know what strategies work best for their students. So I think that's great feedback, that there's an underutilized resource that we need to make sure districts are aware of.
Thank you. Anybody else? Got a couple back here.
62 years ago, I graduated from Brooklyn Technical High School in New York City. At that time, 62 years ago, it was regarded as one of the best high schools in the country. There were two. Bronx High School of Science was the other. We competed. Now that's 62 years. Have you studied successful programs like that? Because Brooklyn Tech is still one of the best schools, high schools in the country. They obviously have a successful program, not because I went there, but my point is that there are success stories around, and they can be learned from. And I was wondering how much has been done to put together the program based upon these success stories that we have existing now.
Absolutely. I'll answer and then let Secretary Oliva add on. But one of the things that I think is really important is we didn't just wake up and say, you know what, these feel like really good ideas, let's put them in legislation. But the decisions were data driven. We didn't just decide like, oh, I think this would be helpful. But every piece of what is in the Learns legislation is driven by data. Things like knowing the impact that literacy and programs that actually work. If you look at a state like Mississippi, they used to be ranked right there with Arkansas at the bottom when it comes to literacy. And in the last several years, they've made major advancements, and now they're ranked 22 in the country because of programs similar to what we have implemented through the LEARNS legislation. Similarly, we have taken a big look at what is working when it comes to workforce development. Unfortunately, no one has gotten it right. No state in the country has really addressed the workforce shortage that exists. But we do know that there is a massive demand for trade and vocational technical training programs, probably similar to the one that you participated in 62 years ago. It's amazing that now we're going back to some of the things that we used to do several decades ago, because for a long time we pushed this lie and convinced people that if somehow you didn't go to a 4-year university that you were less than, and nothing could be further from the truth. And because of that, we have created a massive workforce gap, and now we're trying to make up ground on it. And so one of the things that we have done is look at programs, not necessarily that one, but maybe we'll take a look at it. And we're thankful that you chose to ditch New York and come to Arkansas. So I think that shows just how good of an education you got, is that you were smart enough to leave New York and come to a great place like Arkansas. So clearly you may be one of the smartest people in this room, but I don't know if the person next to you agrees, but she seems like she's oh, well, see, there you go. I don't know who's smarter, probably her, because she, you know, but we are so thankful for a lot of the programs that we have seen, that we have now the ability to look in, see what works, and start implementing. It shouldn't be the exception, though. It should be the rule. Every student, every high school student should have access to some of those type of training programs and the ability to graduate with certification. And that's one of the things that we have done through the LEARNS legislation, is help put these kids on a new pathway. So it's not just everyone needs to go to a 4-year university. Some kids need to graduate from high school and go directly into the workforce. Some may need to go into an apprenticeship or a trade or a vocational program to get additional certification. But the options need to be opened up a lot more, and a lot of kids have no idea about the opportunities that exist in their own backyard, because we have not done a good job of telling them what they are and letting them know that those are not only acceptable, but those are exceptional opportunities for them to participate in. And that's one of the things that we want to change, is not just the opportunities, but the language and the information around those opportunities, so students have a better understanding of what is available to them.
Yeah, and if I was to add to that, Governor Sanders has actually made this one of the high priorities. It doesn't seem to get as much attention, but through her vision and leadership, she actually established a workforce cabinet where she's forcing state agencies. You tell the story better than me. I should let you talk about the work you're doing with the workforce cabinet.
Yeah, one of the things that we found out very quickly is that within state government, we had seven different agencies that all had a workforce component. And I asked how often they were meeting, how frequently are you sitting down and talking to each other? And they said, well, we've never met. And I said, I don't understand. How is it possible that all of you are tasked with working out in the same space, and yet you've never sat around the same table? So we immediately created, through an executive order the first week I was in office, the workforce cabinet, forcing each of those entities and cabinet secretaries to sit down on the regular basis and report back. We also created the position called the Chief Workforce Officer, where we took someone from the private sector and had him as part of that workforce cabinet, and he wakes up every single day with one objective: how do we get more people into the workforce? How do we help create a more skilled, qualified workforce of our students that are graduating, and help change the trajectory of our state and actually be the ones that figure out the workforce shortage? So this has been a huge priority, and it's a big part of the LEARNS legislation, as well as a number of other pieces and priorities, as the Secretary mentioned, through executive order and other ways that we can kind of bring all of the stakeholders to the table, because it's not any one entity. It can't just be driven by education. It can't just be driven by the community or the business. It has to be all of those groups coming together and working together to help provide those opportunities and make sure people are aware of what exists.
And I think one of the exciting things that we've discovered as we've been having these meetings and we're building out this kind of robust career tech high school diploma, and I talk about work groups getting established because this shouldn't be considered a lesser diploma. This should be considered equally or just as rigorous or maybe even more career diploma. And students are earning credentials of value while they're in high school. Like, we've got high schools here, some of these superintendents will tell you that students are earning high quality credentials while they're in high school. And if they want to go to the workforce, great. If they want to go to post-secondary attainment, great. It's about exit ramps and on-ramps. Learning should never stop. So even if you start in career field, you may want to find yourselves going back to upskill. And we have to look at adult education, and we have to look at the system to make sure we're meeting workforce needs and demands. But one of the things that we've definitely identified as we're going through this that we need to do a better job of is making sure that credit transfers, and we have common coordinated system between K-12 and higher ed, because we have some students that'll earn, let's say they earn an LPN or a CNA certificate while they're in high school and want to transfer to a state college or university across town to keep going and maybe pursue a bachelor's in nursing. Well, sometimes the receiving school will say, well, you didn't earn it here, so you have to start all over. And then we wonder why kids get frustrated, because they've already learned it. They've spent a year or two of their life, and now they got to pay more money and start right back from zero, and then they leave. So we've got to fix this, and we've got to incentivize industry to work with us, and we got to make sure that we're producing a product that works well for industry.
Great. Did you have a question as well? 2 from New York. I'm not sure about all this.
I'm sort of almost don't want to ask this, but I will. I know, are you going to have curriculum changes, number one, and how is the federal government going to impact these curriculum changes? Because I've seen in other states how there's been, the state has said one thing and desirous of one thing, and the federal government has come in and said, no, you know, you're not allowed to state that or say that.
Yeah. So when we talk about curriculum, typically we think of the textbook or the teacher's primary instructional tool. That's kind of the common place that people go. It gets a little bit nuanced because teachers grab resources from wherever they can. So, but most of all, I think we're talking about the textbook. So curriculum is still going to be a local decision. So it's up to education as a state to determine the educational system that's going to best meet the needs of the students and families here in Arkansas. School boards are going to adopt curriculum that there's teachers and leaders in that school district say this is what's going to be best for us. What we're working on as an agency is make sure that we help districts identify high quality instructional materials. So we've actually built out a portal, we call it HQIM, because we want to make sure like those early literacy curriculums are really grounded in the science of reading. There's some theories that some people believe, like 3Qing or whole language works for struggling readers, but the research doesn't support that. So we want to make sure our teachers have access to evidence-based curriculum that we know are going to get the outcomes that we get. Where does the federal government come in? Many times states have to assign assurances through federal dollar programs that we receive, which would be considered supplemental to help support schools. Sometimes they like to tie our state's hands and try to push us in a little direction, but I think we have a governor and that's not afraid to push back and say, if we don't think this is going to work for us, you're going to play by our rules, we're not going to play by yours. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, I think that's pretty fair. Yes, ma'am. And then we'll come over here.
I'm Audra Stewart. I'm the high school principal at Westside Greers Ferry, but I've spent most of my years in a K-7 setting, literacy specialist. So my concern with, you know, we talk about third grade students need to be on grade level with reading, but that means that our teachers coming out of higher education, they need to be prepared to teach with the science of reading and have all those concepts. Are we going to put any more pressure or mandates on higher education, colleges, to make sure that they are equipping our teachers coming into early childhood education to be ready to teach those kids?
Absolutely. You're exactly right. If we aren't teaching the science of reading, then we can't expect the results that we're looking for. Teachers have to have the resources and tools that they need, and we know without a shadow of a doubt that the science of reading is the best way to help kids read at their grade level. And so the short answer is yes, absolutely. We cannot allow teachers not to have those resources and have that training. Some of the legislation provides not only for teachers that are currently working to become teachers, or students, I should say, working to become teachers, that those resources, but also for teachers who have been in the classroom for a long time, the ability to do additional training to receive some of the information about the science of reading. So absolutely. And Secretary Levy can go in more detail.
I would say absolutely. If there's one thing I think that's frustrating to school districts is the disconnect from higher ed. And you're hiring a candidate that graduated from a college of education program to become a teacher and don't have the skills to hit the classroom day one. So I think part of this vision and part of Learns is establishing a residency program so that that child or that candidate or student in their senior year spending a full year in the school and getting access to a mentor teacher that can make sure that they're able to apply the theory and practice they're learning in the classroom into their classroom so that they get outcomes. But we're actually going to be releasing, if it's not done yet, I think it's almost done, a teacher preparation report where we're grading every single one of the universities and colleges here in the state on how well they achieve the science of reading, and I don't think some of them are going to like to see their grades.
I promised we'd come here next. So.
Many underperforming schools have diverse populations with high numbers of students on free and reduced lunches. With school choice, many of these schools would be left with only students whose families don't have the ability to apply for waivers. These schools will continue to underperform on state testing because of the challenges faced by these students and their backgrounds, despite having educators who work hard day in and day out to help their students. How is school choice beneficial to all students in our state if these schools continue to underperform and are then taken over by the state?
You want to jump in?
Sure. So first I'm going to say we're going to start with the belief that all students can learn, regardless of their background, regardless of community, regardless of their social economic status. But school choice is about empowering parents. I stated earlier that Learns is about supporting the public schools. We know the research, the data in this state is really clear. The majority of our families are going to choose their neighborhood schools. The percentage of families that are executing choice options is actually really small when you look at the overwhelming number of folks. This is why we're investing in early learning. This is why we're investing in early literacy programs, getting the science of reading, because all students can learn. And we have to have the mindset that all students deserve access to grade level content each and every single day. They may need a little bit of remediation and support, but there's also a lot of students in schools that are underperforming that are ready to be accelerated, and sometimes we don't even create accelerated opportunity because we may have a belief that some of these students aren't ready. So we're pushing the spectrum across kind of K-12 in students that need, every student gets access to grade level instruction every day. Some students need some additional layer of support, but there's also a lot of students that need accelerated opportunities. So we're like even looking at math paths and the number of students that are taking algebra by 8th grade or even 7th grade. There's less than 100 students statewide that are taking geometry in middle school. I think there's a lot more students that are ready. I think there's a lot more students that are ready to be on accelerated paths through their school experience, which will keep them on grade level. There's also, I think, an opportunity as we're going through Learns and Learns implementation is to actually look at the school grading system, because I think when we look at that 8th through F school grading system, and I heard this clear from superintendents across the state, they don't necessarily believe the way it's currently structured, the school grade reflects the learning that's happening. And that's why we like to look at what are those value added measures and look at learning growth models, because sometimes students come to us not ready for kindergarten. but they're learning. That doesn't mean that school is failing. And if we're telling the community that school is failing when kids are actually learning, we need to get that aligned. And I think there's a big opportunity to take some of that misalignment and get it aligned, because some of these schools with high poverty rates are knocking out of the park. And one of the things that I learned when I first got here, this state has what's called a pretty robust value-added model, and that's how they look at measuring growth for students and teachers and schools. And this data is a predictor. It says basically if a student's here based on their unique educator profile, we expect them to be here, and that would demonstrate a year's worth of growth. And we can measure if you're getting more than a year's worth of growth, about a year's of growth, or not a lot of years worth of growth. Well, one of the things that we realize is we have all this robust data, but we don't have a good system for sharing it. So we actually built out an in-house in like about two to 3 months. I call it a van visualization dashboard that we can share with districts, principals, teachers to look at our students learning, because that's the biggest question you're asking, are students learning? So I always like, the first thing I sorted by is, are there F schools in this state with high impact teachers, meaning they're getting more than a year's worth of growth out of these students? And first thing I found is there's 23 teachers teaching reading right now in this state in F schools that get more than a year, a standard deviation more than a year's worth of growth out of their students. Those students are learning, even though they're in an F school. So maybe there's a disconnect. This is why we ask questions, engage in cycles of inquiry. So the first thing we did is, let's go visit these teachers and tell them, you're doing a really good job, because we never told them that they were doing a good job because nobody had access to this data. But then invite them to work with us to say, what are you doing in your classroom that's so special, because you're beating the odds. You're in an F school getting more than a year's worth of growth. These kids can learn. You're proof that these kids can learn, and you're making it happen. So we're actually pulling them all together this summer. We're going to get some best practices so that we can share and scale, because I can take anybody in this room right now, and when you look at DNS schools, the number goes up exponentially. So I can take anybody in this room at DNF schools with classrooms that are knocking out of the park. Is every classroom knocking out of the park? I don't know. That's why we got to go in and find out what's happening. But there are classrooms that are knocking out of the park in struggling schools. We need to build on that momentum and keep that work going.
Yeah, I think to Secretary Oliva's point too, is we had these teachers that were performing at such a high level and no one was telling them, which to me is crazy. We had this data available and we weren't letting teachers know, hey, what you're doing not only is great, but it's working. And you're outperforming any of the expectations that are being set on you. And we want to know what you're doing, because we want to be able to replicate that in other schools around the state. So taking that information, one, letting the teacher know how great of a job they're doing, unbelievably important, but also having that teacher give us insight into what they're doing that is helping them to beat that expectation, and being able to replicate that around the state, I think, is another critical piece that we're trying to work to achieve.
She has a team of 4, and they compare the scores to one another, which I don't really. Sometimes my daughter has real high students, and some they have struggling students. How is it fair to grade a teacher when they have the kids that are struggling? One, on their own, they are slow learners, or 2, they don't have the support at home to get that child to learn. How is it fair to grade a teacher on comparing apples to apples is what I'm trying to say.
That's why I go back to that value-added matter. It takes all those considerations into effect. And in fact, typically you'll see the lowest performing students get the most growth. One of the biggest challenges teachers have is keeping high performing students high, because we tend to teach to the middle of the class. So that's how you look at differentiated instruction, and it starts with making sure they have access to grade level content and instruction each every single day, with targeted explicit interventions that are going to support those teachers. But just because student is a special education student, or earning language as a second language, or lower socioeconomic status, those are realities we all face, but those students can learn, and we got to make sure we're measuring growth and giving teachers credit for the growth they're getting, and schools credit for the growth that they're getting.
Sure, I just want to add one thing. For too long, we kind of looked only at simply the achievement and not the growth. And I think that's one of the big differences of what we're doing, is not just simply looking at the end result, but how much progress did we make, and making sure that teachers understand and know the level of progress that they made. They may have a student coming into 3rd grade that was basically at a kindergarten level, but if they helped that student get to, you know, a 1st or 2nd grade level, they may still not be where they ultimately need and where we want them to be, but looking at the amount of growth and difference that that teacher made over the course of the year is so important. And one of the things that frankly we have not done, we've simply focused only on achievement, and now we're looking at all of those factors together.
Since you raised up to the 50,000 for each teacher, my question is, like, my daughter went on and got her master's. So is it going to be an incentive anymore? Because if you're going to not have the everybody start off at 50, is it going to be an incentive for somebody to want to go get their master's anymore? And also, some of these schools, I forgot what they're called, the ladder climbing on the salary schedule. Is it going to
Steps.
Steps, yes.
Yeah.
Some of these school districts are going to be stopping that because of this. So what I'm asking is, like, is it going to be incentive for teachers to work harder with everybody starting off at the same pay?
It should. I mean, they're doing that now. They're starting off at the same pay. The base level now is just a lot lower. It was $36,000 and now it's $50,000. So you're helping bring new people into the field, or keeping a lot of our teachers, particularly in smaller districts around the state, in the classroom. We've heard from a number of teachers who were at that $36,000, $38,000 pay scale that were going to leave the teaching profession because they needed to make more money. And by raising that minimum up to 50, absolutely. But also when it comes to rewarding our veteran teachers or teachers with master's program and other certification levels, we're giving ultimate flexibility to the district and allowing them to make decisions. If they want to pay a teacher $100,000, they can. I don't know that they will, but they certainly could. And most of our districts are going to continue to reward their best and brightest teachers because they want to keep them in the classroom. And there's no incentive for them to allow those teachers to leave and go to another district. So making our districts more competitive and helping teachers have a higher level of base pay is a good thing. Not only that, but we also made sure that every single teacher in the state of Arkansas got at least a $2,000 pay raise. So every teacher, not just new teachers, not just teachers who are making less than $50,000 are getting a raise. Every single teacher in the state is getting a pay raise, and it is all funded completely by the state, not the district. In perpetuity. We've made a commitment as a state. There's no greater investment that we can make than in our students' education. And we have, and Senator Dismang was absolutely adamant that we don't look at what happens in year 1 and year 2 and year 3 and year 4, but we look at what that means for the long term of our state. He's a numbers guy. He lives and dies by the numbers. And that was really critical and really important for members of our legislature, that this wasn't like a one and done thing and then we say, oh, best of luck to the districts. This is something that the state is committed to and has set aside and made sure we're prepared to fully fund the base pay as well as the increases in perpetuity. And I think that's one of the big misconceptions out there, is that in year 3 or 4, the state's going to wash our hands and leave districts high and dry. And that's simply not the case. Not only is every district still receiving all of the money that they were previous and prior to the passage of LEARNS, they're now getting more money to pay their teachers better, and that is a great thing for our state. It is the largest investment that we have made in public education in decades, and that is a good thing, not just for our teachers, but also for our students and for our communities, because now teachers are going to have more income to spend in their community. They're going to be able to do more by spending more, and that impacts every community across the state of Arkansas. And again, that's a good thing. No, we were actually able to go ahead and still pass a tax cut during this session, and we're going to continue working to phase out the state income tax. So no, got money we've set aside, and we're going to continue making sure that this program is funded, but not by raising taxes.
A question, a lot of activity, a lot of...
Sorry, I was looking here because I saw your hand up, and then I heard a voice, and it wasn't yours.
A tremendous amount of activity, a lot of focus on a bunch of different things, all of them being very beneficial. I guess I'm most interested in implementation. You know, it's not going to be next week, I don't think, but staffing requirements, have we gone to the details of staffing requirements and getting the qualified people on board to implement a good program?
Yeah, so you're right. This isn't going to be fully implemented overnight, and that's why I really kind of harped on what's the rules-making process, because that's what happens is the legislature will sign the bill into law, or it gets signed by the governor. They'll pass the law and get signed into effect by the governor. But how you implement it goes through the rules-making process, which goes back through the legislature, and a lot of folks give feedback, and it goes ultimately to our state board to vote for implementation. The reality is going to take about a year to get most of these rules to go through that process. And in fact, in the legislation, it says it has to be done by July 1st of 2024. We are probably going to go through some of the emergency rule process, especially for the choice programs, because we want to get those up and running now so parents can participate before school starts. Most schools start around first or second week of August. So those are being a little bit more prioritized. But we're going to take our time and be methodical, because it's really important about getting it right. And it's really about supporting the school districts and keeping them informed along the way so that they can get it right. Because with this comprehensive system, when it's put in place, that engine's just going to keep firing on all 8 cylinders, and we're going to continue to see student performance increase.
To follow up, you can't let the legislators chicken out on you.
You guys hear that? I have confidence in the legislature. They fought hard alongside us, and this was not a one individual lift. This was an entire group coming together and working to make sure we delivered something that was really impactful for the state of Arkansas. And I have total confidence in our legislative body that they're going to continue to push until we get the results that, frankly, our students deserve. We got time for a few more questions. Go right here. I promised you already, so I'm going to go to her, and then I'm going to come to you. Did the whole state of New York move to Arkansas? I mean, I don't blame you. I'd get out of New York too, so.
Oh, I don't need that.
They can't hear you on TV.
You spoke briefly just a moment ago about the school districts were going to receive the support from the state in financing this. I'm not a teacher, I'm an educational interpreter. So it doesn't necessarily affect me, but the thing is, it affects our districts. And I work in rural districts, and we have larger districts that we compete with, and the school of choice is going to be a big thing. The other thing, though, is how are our districts going to, our small districts, there is socioeconomics in ours. I mean, big time. You know, we face a lot of things, whether it's drugs, there's a lot of things out there. And it does affect the learning. But the thing is that our districts, are they going to be able to afford to continue to go down this route of paying teachers so much? And I'm not saying that they shouldn't receive it. I do want them to be receiving what they work hard for, because they give their entire lives to these kids. I see it. But how are our districts going to be able to afford it? I've heard from some.
It's real simple. The
other
state's
people,
paying for it.
But for how long is really my question.
In perpetuity. As I answered over here, this is a long-term. Yeah, no problem. But this isn't, like I said, a one and done. This is a long-term commitment by the state. Right now, I think one of the things that people don't realize is that right now the state of Arkansas gives roughly a little over $70,000 to each district for each teacher. How that district breaks that down is largely up to the district. We're trying to give flexibility so that if they need to pay somebody more to be an English teacher, they have the ability to go out and make sure that they have not only an English teacher, but the best English teacher they can find and put that person in the classroom. So all of the funding we are already giving, that amount that the state is already giving to the district to pay those teachers, is still happening. And now we're giving money on top of that to make sure that we cover the raise to the $50,000 base pay, as well as the $2,000 pay raise for every single teacher in the state of Arkansas. It is at the responsibility of the state to help and provide that funding for the district. So to me, it's very simple. The district isn't going to struggle because the state is picking up the tab. Yes, ma'am.
School funding is quite possibly one of the most confusing things that you could ever try to understand.
And only I think about 2 people in the whole state really get it.
Yeah. And I don't promise that I get it completely. But when money comes into a school, whether it's from the state, from local, from federal, there are requirements on this money has to be spent on this. This money has to be spent on this. And what I don't see is where are the schools going to have the money for the additional things that they will need in order to do what we say we're going to do. I think $50,000 is wonderful, but I think you're going to have schools that are going to need to pay more than that to get a really good teacher. I'm concerned about special education, English language learners. You talked about every child can learn. Absolutely. But every child isn't going to be able to learn the same based on what is happening at home and other reasons. So a school has lots of other things besides just the teacher salary. Our school needs money to build because we couldn't pass a millage in this environment a couple of years ago. Well, our school wanted to have enough money and inflation hit. So now, they don't. You don't have extra money in your budget, is what I'm saying. Schools don't have a lot of extra. So does the state have any plan to increase student cost above cost of living? In other words, more for support staff and, all of the extras that they need.
There's a lot to unpack there. I'm going to do my best to address, and I know Secretary Leavell will jump in here as well. First, on the support staff, we did actually increase. That's an hourly for most of the support staff. One of the things that you talk about a lot is that it's not just any one person, but it's kind of the whole educational family that helps get a student to the place they need to be, from the bus drivers to the cafeteria workers to other people that the student interacts with. We actually made an increase in that as well, an additional $2 an hour for each of those individuals in that support staff classification. And so there was an increase there. We also, I know, made an addition in the facilities funding, and off the top of my head, I can't remember exactly what that was. I'm looking over here to see if Senator Dismayne.
We fully funded facilities for at least 5 years for the state. So we had a sizable surplus. I think we set aside $500 million
Something like that.
For facilities funding for districts. That doesn't mean we're building Taj Mahals, but that will give some districts the basic money to use for facilities.
So there was a consideration and money set aside for exactly some of the things that you're talking about. In addition, paying for some of those additional services like literacy coaches that can come into the classroom, tutoring grants that are open for families to take advantage of. There are a lot of other things that were put in this piece of legislation that I think help address some of the issues you're talking about. Are we going to get them all? Absolutely not. But we are making significant progress that I think is going to be seen very quickly in the success of our students. There's going to always be new things that we have to look at and how we can do better and how we can make adjustments and where we need to put additional money. But this is a massive change and start from where we have been in the past, and certainly a good step in the right direction. But that doesn't mean we have fixed by any stretch of the imagination every problem that we have in the education system. But we are going to make significant progress because of the investment that we've made that is, I think, unprecedented for the state.
The last few questions seem to talk about money. And first I'm going to say, you're right. The school funding formula is very confusing, and you almost need to be a statistician or a mathematician or physicist or something to understand how it works. But one of the things I want to make sure people understand is school districts in the state historically get their what they call foundation funding. There's an amount set by the legislature that says every student, because the funding's based on student enrollment, is going to get this much money. Then it gets really complicated with this matrix of services, and it looks at like different regions and different programs and all that. And at the end of this formula, it says every student's going to get about, let's say, $12,000. The school district's going to get about $12,000 to fund the student. School districts' historical funding, they still received this year, just like they did last year, just like they did the year before. In fact, there was an increase to that funding this past school year from the legislature. The LEARNS bill, the teacher salaries, came from a different category of the budget. They've got their foundation funding and categorical funding that they've always received. They still got that. Then the state put on top, on a complete different category, the dollars to do that. Is everything perfect? Probably not. As we go through it, we're finding ways to streamline and be a little bit more efficient. But I don't disagree with you about the funding formula. There may be an opportunity to revisit that, because is the funding formula really supporting or reflecting the needs of students? I don't know if I could say it with 100% certainty it does. You're obviously saying it doesn't. Maybe some of the federal dollars that school districts give may be a little bit closer, because you have to really look at the data and look at the numbers to look at the allocation. So I always think there's opportunities to improve, but I think step one is thank you, Governor, thank you, legislature, for making it's about additional $300 million investment into education. Is this the only investment we're going to make? No, we had to raise these base teacher salaries. We had to start from somewhere. But as we go through next year, I'm always going to ask for more. I may be getting told no, but we're going to do more, we're going to do more, and we're going to have evidence that says what we're doing is working, and it's going to make it easier to get the support from the legislature to continue making these investments.
I think we've got time for probably 2 more questions. Sure.
I'm certified in 4 states. We'll come to you. And so what I don't understand, my first year of teaching was $7,000, believe it or not. We came up the road. You're talking about giving your first year teachers $50,000. There's another lady and I are here. We're substitutes. I don't know what she makes, but do you know what I make an hour? Less than $12 an hour, somewhere between $10 and $12 an hour. I walk into a classroom. You need to make requirements that teachers have lesson plans. You walk into a classroom, there's no lesson plan, nothing. When Ross Perot took over Texas in education, we teachers fought it because he had definite lesson plans we had to make out, had to have an objective, a subject, and everything. In the science department, where I've got my master's in science education, they don't even know what a beaker or a flask is. They go into the classroom and the teacher says, open your Chromebooks and do problem 90. They have no idea. And then they go to medical school, and they don't know what they're doing over there when they start out doing experiments and stuff. We need to change how the teachers are actually teaching in the classroom. You guys need to get a hold of that curriculum and do something about it. And respect your substitute teachers, because we're the backbone that's filling in that classroom day in and day out.
I agree. I agree, and I think when Governor Sanders talked about the educational family, we started with teachers, but we need to do more for support staff, especially with minimum wage going up, the cost of living going up. This isn't the only time we're going to invest in education. Substitute teachers, it's not a good situation for principals and schools if they can't get high-quality substitute teachers, especially if you have a teacher going out for a long-term leave.
their qualifications. I had a young man that's a substitute teacher who just graduated out of high school, and he's a substitute teacher, no college at all. And his comment is, well, I'm not going to go to college when I could make X amount of dollars and no education. We've got to change these people that the school is hiring behind the scenes also. This ESS, I don't know if you've heard about that, Governor, or not, but they're the ones that are hiring a lot of the substitutes in Arkansas.
I have not, but certainly
Let's say
happy to
that's
take a
probably
look at
a
it.
group that the local district's working with, but
Yeah.
we can take that feedback back. But I do think we need to invest in high quality subs.
I promised him, and then we'll come back and finish with you two over here.
My name is Anthony. I'm the director of bands here at Heber Springs Schools. I think I hate to beat a dead horse, but the budget question has been asked. The money question, the teacher pay question has not been asked. When we have a young person, a young teacher who needs a mentor, okay, the first place we go is experienced teachers, people who have 15 and 20 years in, or who have a master's degree and more education than we do, okay? I appreciate the raise that we got. I benefited from it. I do, but a lot of our veteran teachers only got a $2,000 raise. And if you look at our districts, some of the districts around here, our district, Heber Springs, Dr. Ashley did a fantastic job with what he was given, what he was able to do. But with new legislation, there's a lot of unknowns. He had to be very conservative with his budget, and so there were some teachers that only got the $2,000 raise. And when you're making $50,000 and a $2,000 raise, that's 4%. When inflation is 7, 8, and 9%. How are we going to address that? Because those veteran teachers aren't going to sit for a $2,000 raise for very long. They're going to leave. And, we've got young teachers coming up, and the reality is college does not prepare you 100% for school. In fact, most of what you're going to learn is on the job, because the model that the colleges give us, the kids don't fit that model 100%. Most of them don't. And so how are we going to address that retention, taking care of those teachers, because a lot of them feel like they got gypped, and that's why they're leaving.
Well, first of all, sure, you can clap for that, I don't mind. Look, I don't disagree. We want our veteran teachers to be rewarded, which is why we are opening up flexibility to the districts. Once again, whatever money we were already giving, now we are adding on top of that. Without this legislation, you wouldn't even have a $2,000 raise. You would be exactly where you were. So this is a much better step in the right direction. To Secretary Oliva's point, is that the end of the story? We certainly hope not, but it is a good starting place. We have to do a better job of raising the base, helping those teachers. We heard all over, everywhere we went, a demand. Teacher pay, base pay has to go up. So we did that. But we didn't want to ignore those veteran teachers who have been in the classroom for so long. Some of those who have gotten that additional certification and education, things like their master's degree. So we wanted to make sure they also got a raise. So we forced and pushed and fought and worked alongside the members that are sitting in here tonight to make sure that every single teacher in the state got a raise paid for by the state. But that doesn't mean a district can't still give additional raises. They have that flexibility. They have the ability to pay their teachers more if they choose to do that. But the idea that we would ignore the fact that every teacher is getting something more than they would have gotten before this legislation, I think is an unfair criticism of the LEARNS legislation. And to your point, I don't disagree that the mentorship of a veteran teacher, that's why we also added into the legislation, I think Secretary Oliva spoke about it earlier, is that now every student that is working to become a teacher has to spend that last year in the classroom so that they are getting that mentorship, they are getting that firsthand experience so that they're better teachers when they're on their own in the classroom. So we are taking steps to help better prepare those teachers, because you're exactly right. Whatever we put in the textbook is not going to be the scene that unfolds in front of them in the classroom. And so there is no substitute for having an individual spend time in the classroom and spend that with a teacher who has been there before them and can help guide them. You talk a lot about your experience when you were first becoming a teacher, and if you hadn't had that mentorship program, you would have been lost without it. And that's one of the things we tried to include in the legislation, as well as making sure that every single teacher in the state received something. And again, we had to start somewhere, and I think it's a very good starting place. And where we go from there, I think, you know, that's still open to be determined. I promised these ladies I would come back over here.
I am proud to be a substitute teacher. I'm a transplant from Michigan. When I retired, and
you didn't get the same love that the New Yorkers got,
I know. Actually, it's Detroit,
we're glad you
but we won't go there.
We're glad you chose our lakes over Michigan's. They're much
Okay.
prettier here.
But just like the lady and I were talking before we got in here, we have become glorified babysitters. No lesson plans. I can teach. I know how to teach. I know how to reach the kids. You have to have a high school diploma here to sub. Michigan, it's minimum of 2 years of college. I'd like to see two things happen. One, increase our pay, because there's a lot of days I have 3 or 4 classes because we don't have subs, and we're herded into the cafeteria. Okay, so look at our pay. And secondly, we need to have more education. I don't want to be a glorified babysitter. I want to help these kids. These kids are my future. Okay, so I would really like you to address that.
Don't disagree, and I would encourage you to talk to some of the legislators in the room as well, because they can help us with that. I'm sure you have. I'm sure you have. I think there was somebody else right here that I promised we'd come back to.
I'm a retired elementary teacher, and my biggest frustration when I taught was I had second graders. They spent about half the day on a computer. We were required to have them on the math program, the reading program, keyboarding, which back in the day we called typing. We learned in high school. And then in addition to that, we had to do Dibble's progress. Well, first of all, the first 2 months of school, no teaching going on, because we're testing everybody individually for that, for Dibbles, and other tests. So it's like 2 months of teaching gone. Then we spend the year, we have to go back like once a month, do the Dibbles progress monitoring, each student individually, and it's just on and on. You spend the whole year, they're on the computer half the day, you're documenting all the time, you're testing all the time, and there's like this much time left for teaching. And I just want to know if y'all have any plans for, or if you even knew that was going on, and what we can do about it, because it's ridiculous.
So Dibbles is gone. That went away a while ago, and that was a fluency assessment. There was based on, I think, some federal programs that school districts were a part of. But I don't disagree. If we learned anything from the COVID pandemic, trying to do virtual learning or distance learning or computer-based learning, is that does not work for the majority of our students. They need a high-impact, effective teacher delivering directed, high-quality lessons each and every single day. The computer is not a substitute. There is no state mandate that requires a minimum amount of computer time for students. So if districts are doing that, I'd love to talk to them. That's a strategy. It's probably not the most effective strategy. There are better strategies out there. Is there a role for some of these programs to be maybe supplemental? Yeah, but that should not be a child's core instruction. So this is why I think, which is pretty good about what Learns does, even when you talk about that too much testing, because we need to get a snapshot in time of student progress. So parents need to know how students are doing. Teachers need to make instructional pivots. Students should understand their learning. In that early learning space, what's really great is that we're going to put that unified coordinated progress monitoring system so that it's just 3 times a year, one quick assessment, and it's going to include their progress monitoring, the dyslexia screening, all of these requirements, because right now teachers are having to stop teaching, depending on their district's program, 7, 8, 9, 10 times a year to do these required assessments, we're going to embed that all into one assessment so that can be done 3 times a year to protect teaching time. Teachers need to be freed up to teach and not meet state or federal mandates, and we're doing our best to minimize that.
I would loan you mine, but I don't think you want this one right now.
Okay, I am not a teacher. Let me say that first. But how are you going to equate what you just said about the teaching and the evaluation of the children who are in public school versus the children, or including the children who are in private schools, and particularly the homeschooled children? And I was happy to hear you say that it's not going to be a check that goes and can go for the Xbox. But how do you plan to do that with those children who are homeschooled, and will the testing be the same for the privates and the publics?
It does. It has to be the standardized assessment that will be determined by the state. So they can't just pick any assessment test that they want. It would have to be approved by the state in order for a private school or a homeschool family to participate in the education freedom accounts. So there would be, again, that accountability mechanism monitored and approved by the state. That would be very similar to the same type of standardized assessment that you would see in the public school.
So, great questions. Part of I go back to we're establishing rules to identify what those assessments are. We're working with experts in the field. But right now, the state requires an annual assessment because we have state statutes that require student monitoring performance. We also have some federal requirements because we have to monitor and report how students are performing. So right now, the state assesses students in 3 through 10 in English language arts, and currently right now 3 through 10 in math and science, but some of that's going to change a little bit next year because we're building on new assessment to go back to end of course exams in high school. So there'll be biology, algebra, geometry instead of grade level assessments. So that is currently the practice. A lot of the private schools, some of them participate in the state assessment, the same state assessment that they use now. Some have another nationalized assessment, nationally recognized assessment that they use. So if that gets approved, then they want to currently use the assessment they have now. But then they would be reporting out how their students are performing, because we want parents to know how students are performing and we want them to be informed. We want to have high quality choices. So as we build this out, what that accountability looks like may change from year. It may look different next year or 5 years from now, but we got to start from somewhere, and this is where we're starting to build some of the pieces to this puzzle.
We'll make you our last question of the night.
I just have a comment.
Sure.
I just want to say that I teach at a wonderful district. I teach at Midland, and our principal has made us accountable for our lesson plans. I never have a sub in my classroom without lesson plans. Even if I'm at home sick, I make sure my lesson plans are delivered to that sub in my classroom. So it's only as effective as your leader is. If your leader makes you accountable for those lesson plans, your principal, then you shouldn't have a problem. So if there are teachers doing that in classrooms, I just want to say it's not every teacher. It's only as effective as the leader is.
And we talked about that the research is clear. The teacher has the greatest impact on student. The number 2 is the principal. And good teachers will follow a good principal anywhere. Good teachers will leave a bad principal really quick. So we've got to invest in good leaderships as well.
And I just have one more comment.
Yes, ma'am.
You can please some of the people some of the time, but you cannot please all of them all of the time.
Oh, I'm well aware. If I get to please some anytime, I feel pretty good about the day. But I hear all of the negativity all day, every day. But, you know, one of the great things, and certainly want to be respectful of everybody's time, so we'll wrap here, but our team will be around, and if people have additional questions, certainly happy to answer those online over the course of the next several days too. But, you know, there has been a major push. We spent 2 years on the campaign talking about the fact that education was going to be our #1 priority. And we laid out exactly what that was going to look like in the LEARNS legislation and what the pillars of that legislation would look like. And everywhere I went, whether I was in Northwest Arkansas, Central Arkansas, Northeast or South Arkansas, people were hungry for change because they know that, #1, our teachers deserve better. They know that our parents needed more options. And ultimately, and most importantly, they know that our students are capable of reaching much higher levels than we are right now as a state. That is not even a question, that we are more than capable of competing at the top instead of the bottom. And we have to put a focus on this. We spent those 2 years traveling to every part of the state, and overwhelmingly we heard people say, we want this to happen. You know, I joked about the negativity. I certainly hear that. In my family, we like to joke that just because people eat their soup the loudest doesn't mean it tastes better. And that could not be any more true than when it comes to this piece of legislation, because I spent those 2 years talking about what we were going to do when I got elected, and I won with a historic margin talking about exactly this. The people were hungry for it, and we had a legislature that worked day and night to deliver what the people had asked for. And is it perfect? Absolutely not. But is it a great start? Is it going to bring about transformational change to our state? Yes. Simply accepting the status quo and doing nothing was not acceptable. That was not something that we were going to step in and allow to continue. We know that our state and our students are capable of achieving much higher than where we are right now. But if we continue to expect ourselves to be at the bottom, then we're going to stay at the bottom. You know, one of the things that we've talked about a number of times is that Secretary Oliva has asked people, you know, where do you think we rank? And they just put out some new rankings, and, you know, whether you agree with the way that they did it and the methodology, that can be debated all day, every day. But time after time, we find ourselves at the bottom. And the most recent rankings had Arkansas at 43rd. And you have a lot of people who are like, oh, I didn't expect us to be that high. That is a horrible way of thinking. That means that we expect our state to be at the bottom, and to me that is not acceptable, because I know that we can be first and second, but we have to make changes to get there. Some of them are not going to be fun, some of them are not going to be easy, but allowing our students to stay in a failed, broken system is not acceptable. We can and we must and we will do better. And that's exactly what this legislation delivers for our students. And we're going to continue to fight for it. We're going to continue to answer questions and help make sure that everybody understands that the ultimate goal is to see our kids succeed. I don't think there's a person in this room who feels differently. Like I said when I started, people may argue over how we get there, but ultimately, if we come together and we work together, we are going to see a difference in our students, which means we're going to see a difference in our state. And that is something to be celebrated and something to be proud of. And I can't tell you how thankful I am for the partnership that we had with the members of the legislature that worked hard and worked diligently day and night to make sure we delivered for the people of Arkansas. We're going to continue working, we're going to continue tinkering, we're going to continue perfecting until every student in the state of Arkansas has access to a quality education. And we're not going to rest until we get there, until we're at the very top, because I simply will not settle for being at the bottom any longer. As a parent, my kid's future and the future of every kid in the state is far too important for us to let the criticism and the negativity stop us from doing things that we know are going to make a difference. And so that's our commitment. We're going to continue to invest. We're going to continue to push until we get to the top, because I know we can get there. I want to say thank you again for your willingness to be here tonight. Like I said, I know you could be in a lot of places. We're glad that you chose to spend time here with us, because it means you care about the future of our state too. And if we work together, we're going to get to the top. And it's going to have some challenges, but we will certainly get there. So thank you for being here with us tonight. Again, we're happy to continue to try to answer some questions over the next couple days if people want to submit those online. So I know there were still some hands up, and happy to do that. But thank you for being here tonight. We'll work together to make sure our students move to the very top. So thank you, guys.